Right, hello everyone, and thanks again for logging in good time today. A really warm welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us today and taking time out of your day. Today's webinar, as you know, is Y3D, Building the Foundation for Successful 3D Implementation. My name is Heather Thorpe, and I'm with juststyle.com, and I will be your moderator for today. And today we have Eryn Gregory, Jackie Lewis, and ID Lee. So I'll just give you a little brief introduction about our three speakers before we introduce you properly. So firstly, we have Eryn Gregory, and she is the founder of ErgoDesign Inc., an apparel innovation consulting firm. Her career spans almost 30 years in the outdoor and active apparel industry, working for brands such as Nike, REI Coop, Columbia Sportswear, and Puma, holding executive roles in the areas of design, development, fit, 3D, materials, and sourcing. Eryn led the virtual prototyping initiative at Columbia Sportswear beginning in 2013, an experience that subsequently led her to dedicate much of her time to helping brands successfully navigate the 3D journey. Eryn is the lead instructor for the Y3D online course that MOTIF, the Apparel Knowledge Hub, is launching in July 2019. We also have ID Lee, who is the Senior Vice President at Lee & Fung, and she deals she's the Senior Vice President for Digital Product Development Center of Excellence and responsible in leading and driving all operations for servicing the digital supply chain services in product development. The fundamental vision is to facilitate a flexible digital platform that brings end-to-end connectivity across the value chain virtually and harnesses the power of data. ID joined the Fung group in 2004 as part of the management trainee program. She has spent her first year rotating through various business units in both merchandising and operations roles, and has worked closely with business leaders, merchandising teams, and customer teams on the supply chain and logistics landscape. Last but not least, we have Jackie Lewis, who's the Course Development Director at MOTIF, with a career spanning almost 30 years in technical design and product development with organizations such as M&S, Littlewoods, Shop Direct, C&A, and Misguided. Jackie Lewis joined MOTIF in 2018 as Course Development Director. Jackie also brings her expertise to Alvenon clients as a consultant focusing on 3D, process efficiencies and sustainability. Jackie admits being a retailer at heart with a passion for textile, ethical sourcing and sustainability and new technologies. She is an ardent advocate of professional development in the industry too. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you first to Jackie, who will kick us off today's event.
Hi everybody, Jackie here. I just wanted to take a little bit of time to talk through the agenda for today. Fortunately, you've got three panelists today, so hopefully it will be of interest and there'll be a bit of variety as we work through the presentation. I'm going to start off with talking about the bigger picture, both in terms of what's happening in our industry and the impact that that has on skills, and also touch on the position of MOTIF and what we're all about. Eryn Gregory is then going to pick up and talk about what that means in terms of landscape relating to 3D, and talk in detail about the course and how the course is going to address some of the issues that we have in terms of skill gaps. And then finally, we're going to finish with ID Lee from Lee & Fung, who's going to talk about the journey that they've taken towards digital transformation within their business and some of the lessons learned they've had so far. And not to forget, hopefully we're going to have some great questions at the end to talk about and answer for you today. So that's our agenda, full packed and hopefully of interest. So then moving on to just talk about the bigger picture and what's happening in the industry. I want to just spend a little bit of time to reflect on what's happened in the last 200 years within the industry as a whole, and some of the key fundamental changes that we've seen. If you go back to the Industrial Revolution, there we've seen large-scale mechanisation, the impact of water power and steam power. And then as we moved into the 20th century, mass production came online with the advent of electricity. If you think about today, what would we do without electricity today? And then in my lifetime, we've seen computerization becoming mainstream and large-scale automation. And now we're facing the next, what we're calling the fourth industrial revolution, a key step change in industry as a whole, with cyber physical systems, really the impact of the internet, big data, digitization, and robotics. Now, if you think about what's happening within the industry, straight away you have to think about the disruption that causes in terms of the impact to people and the face of employment, and the impact also that has on skills and the relevance of the skills that we have today. So we're about to launch into another phase, really. And for the first time, I would say in 200 years, we're probably behind the curve in terms of knowledge and skill set and preparation for this new phase. So what are people saying at the moment? There's so much noise going on out there in the industry. We're being bombarded with messages and trends such as personalization, sustainability, automation, 3D. You know, it's so kind of confusing and so complex. Sometimes it's difficult to work out what's important to focus on next and whether we've got the skills really to support these key changes and trends. And at the bottom of all of this, for business leaders of today, we're still trying to drive profitability and business as usual. And also, if you think about the impact on people, the question for me is, do our people that we employ today have the skills to drive some of these changes for the future? So let's move on and talk about specifically what that means in terms of the skill gaps. We've got two main issues that we're facing right now. The first problem that we see is the fact that the craft is an issue. The old skills, the skills that we knew from 30 years ago are declining within our sector. We've got people retiring with the knowledge. The industry is now looking for different skills, blended skills. You know, you used to be a numbers person or a product person. Now the industry requires you to have strength in both of these areas, which is very, very different to what we've known before. And then also the other big impactor in terms of knowledge base is the move away from manufacturing. Over the last 30 years, I would say it's become less and less attractive to work in manufacturing. And as a result of that, we've lost some of the knowledge base that we require for the future. And then the second big problem that we face is our world is changing. The shelf life of knowledge and training is probably about 5 years. So it's no longer acceptable to train up in a discipline and go into a job and be doing the same job in 20 years' time. We've got to be retraining and reskilling and upskilling all the time. I mean, how many people, if you think about it within our industry, do you know how many pattern cutters out there have coding skills, for example, which could be an industry requirement for the future? Just one simple example there of what we might face. So what are the key skills that we need for the future? There was a report just done recently which threw out that the 5 big skills that people need to be effective in the future are really largely based around technology, creative thinking, and digital skills. Now that's very different to the expectations of a designer in the past. If you think about the role profile for a designer in the past, it would not have mentioned that they had any of these requirements in terms of skills or training. So the future looks different, and I think we are all at a tipping point now where we need to realise and face up to the fact that if our businesses are going to be competitive in the future and innovative, that these are some of the things that we need to face into in terms of our current workforce, and these are the skills that we need to recruit to. Okay, so moving on, I think what I'd like to talk to just very, very quickly, because I know a lot of people dialing in today are interested in the 3D course. I wanted to just touch on who MOTIF, who we are, what we do. We launched in October of 2018 as a knowledge hub for the apparel industry. We see our focus and our purpose is to build and bridge this gap that we currently see in the skill base within the industry, both taking the craft and the knowledge forward and blending that with the new training and learning that's required for the future. So that's the position that we take up in terms of what we do and what we're looking to do and looking to achieve. We've got 4 courses already available on our site. And we are launching new courses in the next couple of weeks and through this year. If we move on to the next slide, you can see the new material that's coming soon. And particular focus and what we want to really dive into today is the importance of the Y3D course. We're very excited about this course. It's going to be launching in July of this year. We've been working with Eryn, Gregory as our subject matter expert on the course. And at this stage, I think I should hand over to Eryn so she can talk through the background to the course and give you more detail on what the course is going to do and what it's going to cover.
Great, thank you, Jackie. I love that term, subject matter expert. In fact, I think I only qualify as that person because I've been through this process myself a few times now. And everything I'm going to talk about now is really related to the approach that we took with MOTIF on this course and how we arrived at something that I think will really answer some questions for brands, vendors, mills out there who are struggling with the rationale as well as their own vision for what 3D can do for them and their profitability and the future of building product for consumers. So as you can see, as we look through some of these concerns and these what we call hesitancies, ultimately the catalyst for this course came about because of this overwhelming amount of noise in the industry about 3D. I mean, think about it. Our lives have been irreversibly altered by technology at an incredibly fast rate. Everything from how we interact with each other to how we purchase products. Our daily lives have really become virtual ones, almost overnight. It's hard to imagine for any of us a time when ordering online and receiving it within 24 hours wasn't the norm. And yet a ton of brands in the apparel industry really lag behind in their digital transformation plan. And even with an overwhelming shift in consumer habits, we are still hesitant to dive in. So as you look at this chart, I bet you can all identify some issues that you personally have had or your brand is posing. And this was really, like I said, the catalyst of why and how we approach the course, so that we are not telling you how to necessarily what 3D provider is going to be the best fit for you, but we're going to start giving you the tools to answer some of these questions and deal with some of these pain points in your own organization, and hopefully help you set that path forward into your own 3D journey. So let's try to cut through some of this noise. Oh, yeah, there we go. So as we all know, reacting to that swirling black hole of concerns is only going to provide temporary solutions. Change is constant, and if all your time is spent solving existing problems, your company will be hanging out in that vortex for a very long time. And if life teaches us nothing else, we learn that we cannot control the external world, but that by setting our own path, we can at least navigate our journey through it with a little more insight and direction. So at the root of the MOTIF course, was this idea that if we could help brands be more proactive instead of reactive, we will have really achieved something. So here we are. We're going to take a look at a snapshot of what that approach looks like. So we start with why. And here, as you can see, the industry says that 3D is going to make you and your brand more efficient, build more consistency in the product, the process, fit, everything. It offers sustainability solutions for you, whether it's from sampling to from prototyping to sampling to the way you deliver images to your consumer. And ultimately, speed to market is an amazingly impactful reason to switch to or to adopt 3D into your processes. But it also is a point to consider where that you have the ability to make better informed quality decisions. So it's not only speed to market, but speed to decision making, high quality decision making. Those are all fantastic reasons that you're going to hear to launch 3D and transform your business in a digital way. But ultimately, the way we looked at it and the way I looked at it when going through this the first and the second and the third time was to look at it as in what's in it for me. What are the pain points I'm living through in my organization? How does it relate to our mission? How does it support our core values? How do we stay unique? What sets us apart from our competition? And ultimately, we really took a look in this course of how it's going to affect every aspect of the business, our people, our product, the profitability, and the planet. So that is how we kind of started by asking that big question, why? Then you look at these questions and you think, okay, these are some serious questions to consider and pretty difficult to answer. In my own experience of building 3D, answering each of these imperatives was critical to successful implementation, and more importantly, the process transformation that went along with it. Without this level of scrutiny, there was no measure by which I could gauge my progress or track our return on investment. And really what happens in this stage is that by cascading down and starting with the why and looking at your strategy, the plan that begins to form the foundation is really the transition from your current state to where you want to be in the future. So as we start to looking at the what factor of supporting of your current state and looking forward into how or where you want to be, there's the idea of looking at what is the scope of that transition? What is the business needing? Where does it want to be? Looking at the business as usual impact, there's going to be a time and transition where it's going to have a major impact on how you work now and obviously how you work in the future. And then there's going to be the facet of how you are communicating to executive leadership on what this looks like from an ROI, return on investment standpoint. And ultimately, there are macro processes, systems that you are going to have to make sure are being considered while taking a look at these options in your 3D partnerships. Then we start looking at how, and at that 30,000 foot level, when we talked about what, those are the big items you're going to look at of what your future state looks like. You start coming down from that 30,000 foot level, and the plans and the actions start to really zoom into focus. And the how section of the course is dedicated to creating those tools that is going to help your brand realize its future state. We call these the fundamentals or the foundations, and they form the backbone of any 3D transformation. But frankly, many organizations are simply not aware of them. So here, when we talk about these 4 items of foundations and timeline and infrastructure and 3D partnerships, as well as your partnerships with your vendors and your retailers, this is where we start to get specific in the course and start giving you the tools that are going to help you build a framework for the journey. All right, so then ultimately, when we talk about the success of 3D implementation and transformation, it comes down to the success of its people and the success of how you have brought people along with you on this journey. Knowing that your team is behind you and shares your vision and can execute that strategy successfully is going to take a lot of work. And we've taken great care in this course to make sure that the human factor is embedded within every step of the course. So as you can see, we're not only going to talk about the impact to your internal staff, but also your external partners, upstream and downstream. The training it's going to take to not only sync new skills, as Jackie talked about in the earlier section, what it's going to take, what that timeline is going to look like for your team to transition to new skill sets, but also how you support them and incentivize them. And ultimately, the workload that is going to also be impacted by a shift in job responsibilities, timelines, as well as who does what during the transition and during the implementation. These are all considerations that we wanted to make sure were part and parcel of the course. So that's a quick overview of how we built the Y3D course. And here are some of the learnings you can expect to take away. So here I'm just going to highlight as these are kind of click through. The framework of the course we felt was, obviously interactive learning is going to be more impactful. We wanted to familiarize people with the necessary 3D terminology, but we wanted to build it in a way that could really relate to you and your team. So we've created a learning experience aimed at mid to senior level management, new to the 3D world, or just folks who really need to learn more before they venture on. The target audience for this, I just want to highlight, is going to be everybody from the product design through the development, through the commercialization phases of a brand. But there are absolutely end-to-end aspects that we're going to highlight that will show that current state to future state, that shows the impact of transforming product design through commercialization, and how that then becomes the foundation for impacting positively your upstream and downstream partners and can really fulfill that strategic vision. We are crafting the course right now to create a self-paced and interactive, as I mentioned, course that is going to be available, about 2 to 3 hours of material that will be available on the motif.org site. And it's going to, as a highlight, as we will get to, it's going to include a case study with Lee and Fung, and which will really put some meat on the bone. We'll create a great amount of contextual material that is very relatable to you and your brand. All right. So the next slides, I just want to kind of summarize and tell you kind of the high level what is going to be delivered by this Y3D course. So first, what we really want to focus on is how you will arrive at your own why, so that you build the strength of a strategy that it becomes your roadmap throughout the entire 3D journey. Secondly, we really are focusing on all of the foundational pieces that are necessary, depending on, irregardless, I should say, of who you're going to partner with. Many times we see that the foundational pieces, whether that's blocks or whether it's integration into other systems, aren't fully realized before that journey begins. And this is an area of focus for the course. Next, we want to help your organization work towards a realistic ROI. And what I found in my experience here was what looks fantastic on paper when you look at how many samples can be replaced by virtual assets, how many prototypes can be eliminated by you and your vendor, and the materials waste, waste that's associated with that, and kind of the projected timeline to get to this positive ROI. As anybody knows, through a business transformation, building it on a realistic platform and realistic timeline can be a challenge. So we do focus in the course of how this is not only some of the lessons learned, but also how you too can manage that successfully. And next, we want to as I mentioned, creating that foundation also kind of leads you to this idea of creating the right match. Who is that 3D software provider who's going to be the perfect match for your brand and your strategy? So we're going to help you by creating a software checklist as well as the scorecard. So you and your team are going to be able to analyze analytically and without a lot of subjectivity, you know, swayed by a fantastic looking presentation, but really making sure that the 3D vendor that you are that is right for your business is the one that you select. And finally, we really cannot emphasize enough that bridging that skill gap, making sure that you are taking your employees and your executive team with you on this journey entails a lot of care. And so bridging the skill gap and making sure that you have an employee base of the future, not only for 3D transformation, but all of the change that exists for all of our lives, is building a culture of excellence and knowledge, and as well as proactiveness versus reactiveness. So finally, we really want to focus, and we have focused on in the course about bridging that skill gap. Okay, so now I'd like to transition and introduce Heidi Lee from Lee & Fung, who's going to offer some insights on how 3D has transformed her organization's end-to-end processes and has really created new opportunities for their customers. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Eryn. Hi, everyone. This is Heidi. So I'd just like to introduce you about some of the stories and how we actually made an initiative to actually go into a more 3D virtual stamping world in our company. So I will start off with my next slide on talking about what that really means and what our vision is in our company. So to make it really simple, as you saw on the slide, our vision for the product development process is really to transform how our customers have been working and be able to develop, assort, buy, and sell products by leveraging skills of digital and virtual renderings in order for them to actually be able to design and develop, come up with merchandises, plan and sort, and even be able to sell in the whole digital economy that we're in. So in the design and development stages, we want to innovate, ideate, and create insights where you can visually see things and make better decisions, as what Eryn and Heather has always been talking about, in order to create a more demand-driven supply chain where you are much more responsive to the market, which also brings you a lot of impact in terms of the speed, sustainability, and also a lot of the inefficiencies and the redundancies that's created in the vicious cycles of the processes. So in my next slide, I will be talking about how we bring that as a service. So in our company, when we first looked at the whole process of how we want to change the conventional way into a 3D way of running, I sort of dissected that whole organization into the 6 buckets of how we conventionally run our supply chain, with design teams, with then PD teams, with technical design teams, with fitting technicians, and then you would have a whole website marketing team, and then you would have retail team. Now in the digital space, you can actually run all of that within a one value chain. And from that value chain, you start digitizing by going born digital. What I mean by born digital is starting to become digital in the very beginning of the stage, when you start thinking about how you want to design, create your raw materials, come up with inspirations on your trims, and forming that collection together. Then you also will go in with your technicians in talking about your blocks. You would have digital patterns of blocks of certain styles and silhouettes that you would use, which would already be production ready for you to actually manufacture and create. And then it goes into the prototyping stages where you will be forming into product development. And you would also be then going into the fitting stages where you'll be doing fitting. So in the digital world, you are doing exactly the same. And you can even design, fit and prototype within a very limited part of your time. And once you actually come up with your designs, you then can actually make use of those assets back to creating a lot of other visuals for your cataloging, your showrooms, your stores, and even in the retail space, using those assets to sell online, or even in your shops where you do virtual try-ons. So it actually really does create a very big demand pool driven association. So I kind of dissected them into 6 boxes of services to get you all to understand how this value proposition brings into the same conventional way of the supply chain. I will show you my next slide, where I actually describe more in detail of what we see the benefits of going through a digitized supply chain rather than a very conventional traditional way, which is really shortening those product development cycles. As you can see on those little images on the side, they were actually simulations coming from exactly one same silhouette, but the amount of possibilities that you can create, and not having to make one sample before making decisions and filtering out what is really the right appropriate type of product you want to create for your brand or for your collections. And you can review everything at real time with much shorter lead times instead of going back and forwards with your physical cycles. And you can facilitate a lot of feedback and comments on what that idea means. So it enables a much more better demand-driven supply when you are closer to your market, and actually you can test insights of knowing what's going to happen. And being able to be more responsive to your supply chain also helps you bring down all the markdowns and all the stock outs, or even control your inventory levels within your retail space as well. So it doesn't just happen in helping your efficiencies in your processes, but it also helps enable a lot of reduced, more initial, better planning of your inventories and assortments in a very beginning level, so that you have much better responses to your consumers and understand and spend much more time understanding what your consumers need. So that's why we really thought, going into the digital space was very important. The next slide, which you would see. So after talking about the benefits, I sort of put in a slide of showing what is the difference between a traditional, conventional way of running the processes within the supply chain versus how it really actually runs through in a digital aspect. So in a traditional, conventional way, your supply chain usually goes on a sequential basis. So things actually only happen and decisions are only made once one incident or one part of the process happens. And then you have a lead time of waiting for responses, waiting for feedback, and you actually start again from scratch in going through every part of that cycle. So it's a very sequential and linear sort of way of working. While in a digital world, as you see on the bottom of the slide, it's a much more parallel and collaborative approach, where you actually see all the designs, all the concepts, and all the possibilities in one go, and you make your changes on a real-time iterations. And before you actually go into manufacturing or making anything physically, you actually are able to make as much changes as you want, and then think of what your first time right physical sample is and what that milestone could be. So in many customers that we've been working with in my company, they actually tend to put different milestones depending on the appetite and how much of digital transformation they would need in their organizations. So when you see my chart, instead of calling that first time right physical sample a proto sample or a salesman sample or a fitting sample or a pre-production sample, we actually renamed it to be the right first time physical sample, because that milestone can mean anything to anyone in any of your organization. And that is totally dependent upon, as what Eryn mentioned in the beginning, on how your organization slowly brings through those milestones and how you can penetrate using digital through the transformation of your organization. So in my next slide are some case studies of how we've been working with some our customers. So the first case studies is really talking about the product development stage, the prototyping stage, where we work with a multiple category retailer with a 3 billion plus revenue, and they actually wanted to start with some very quick rapid prototyping on coming up with some very fresh replenishment programs going into their brands. So while those designers were walking around doing their market research, they found a really nice pair of pants, denim, that they liked, and they wanted to actually create something very similar through a photograph. So what we did was we took the photograph of the image, and then we created something into 2D and 3D renderings to let them have a look at, is this something very similar to what they want based on some available fabrications. And we started prototyping all of the samples coming in. Now, if we had to actually do that through a manufacturer coming up, it would actually take, just merely for the patterns to be ready and manufacturing the very first pass sample for them to see, would take at least 2 weeks. But within this process, we actually went through all of the 2D sampling, created the patterns, went through the rendering, did all the prototypes within 48 hours. And they actually had a physical sample, which was the perfect proto of the first time right physical sample that they could use for a sales internal review of whether that collection would actually sit in with the products within 3 weeks. And orders were even placed for those pants for a pretty big order. It was over a few thousand pieces for just one colorway in one styling. So my second case study is about enhancing speed. So as we all know, speed is one of the most fundamental foundations of us going through the 3D journey, and it has been proven to us that using 3D and using virtual sampling in a lot of programs which you need lots of quick turnaround and very replenishment items on silhouettes and blocks have actually been very beneficial. Now, this North American sports brand that we've been working with for quite a long time actually has a lot of quick turnaround programs where they come up with collections and they need all of those quick turnarounds into their shops within a month's period of cycle. So they go in with very quick turnaround cycles. And what we did with them was we had everything approved digitally within 5 days for the full collection, with design work all done and put together. So we created the whole collection of 30 styles with 50% of all of those styles approved fully digitally in the second season within 5 days of 2 prototyping cycles. And everything was in there for their whole collection review with their licenses within 25 days, including all the physical samples that they required as the salesmen. So this is enhancing speed because this is talking about a whole product development cycle, which usually takes at least 3 to 4 months. But what we did was with these quick turnaround programs of 30 styles was we completed the whole product development cycle stage within 25 days, including salesman samples that they can actually go and sell with complementary visuals of digital designs in all of the different variations and colorways. A next case study which I would like to also share with you is about a company. This is actually a very interesting prospect where it's talking about crowdsourcing. So it's really using virtual digital samplings to create new business models. And what this e-tailer does is it has a purpose in their whole goal is to be as sustainable as possible. And the crowdsourcing idea is where nothing of the product is made until the consumer or the community that they are in actually funds for that product, which means they place an order and they buy the product. And what they do is, in the beginning, they would actually submit ideas of certain types of products. In this case, it was a handbag. It was a leather handbag, where they came up with some artwork, and then they came up with some digital raw materials and trims. They submit those ideas onto their website, and the communities would then comment and vote on the design and choose what they would like. And then after they have come up with votes on the proposed changes, they would create all of those virtual renderings into the changes which they required from the community. And then within a time frame of 1 week, they would have a time for them to fund for the product. When they actually go in funding, that is the time where they're actually buying the product, which they have never seen as a real sample, and everything was made virtually. Once they press the funded button and they got enough funds to actually purchase for this product, they would then wait 30 to 45 days for the order, for the actual product that they funded for to be sold and shipped to their homes. So this whole crowdsourcing business model is really virtually selling ideas, collections of product, which has actually not even been manufactured at all. And I do see that in our digital economies now, a lot of our lower 2, 3 generations actually purchase online and do actually like some sort of personalization or some interactions with the products that they use because of their identity. They want to actually be part of that choice. So creating this business model of using virtual samples for them to come up with votes and to submit certain ideas, and then funding for a product that they think they actually have contributed to, has been one of the upscaling models of some e-tailers as well. And it has created quite a lot of mass within the American economy in the e-tailers world as well. Now, they don't only sell bags, they also sell shoes, and they also sell apparel as well. So, and all of the products that they do are all actually made virtually, and none of it is actually manufactured until they are funded by the community. So this is also a very interesting case study that I would like to share with you all. So I think that that's all that I have in terms of case study sharing.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Heidi. Now, at this point, I'd really like to introduce Jackie back into the conversation. Jackie's going to ask Heidi some questions and really talk about some more specific details regarding people in training. So over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Heather. You know, it's fantastic, isn't it, to hear some real life case studies around the impact of 3D, not only from a process point of view, but in giving the consumer what they want. But Heidi, I was just thinking back to the comments from earlier about the impact change has on people. And I wanted to just ask you a couple of questions about how you manage that within Lee & Fung. You've been on a journey now. I think it's well reported that Lee & Fung has a 3 to 5 year digital transformation strategy. But how were you able to mobilise that? Was it very much a top-down approach, or was it a bottom-up approach?
It was definitely a top-down approach. So as you know, in Lee & Fung, we actually run into a lot of 3-year plans. So every 3 years, we actually come up with our new strategy and goals and visions. And having the breadth of the customers that we have, we actually saw a vision that, you know, speed, innovation and digitization was our key goals for the 3 years that we are just in. So 2017, 18, 19 was actually one of our 3-year plans. So 2019 now is the last year of our 3-year plan. And within this 3-year plan, because we found there was a demand and a very big push in the digital economy of changing the relevance of how sourcing companies and how industry works. So we decided to actually move forward in that and really be more proactive in the investments on what we make in digital. And that was actually why we established the Digital Product Development Center of Excellence, because we do believe we need to educate the industry, educate ourselves as an organization to bring ourselves to an even further journey down.
Well, you're very much, I think, seen as leaders in the field with this kind of very much an end-to-end approach to digitisation. And it's great to hear that you had the support from the top, because I think that is a big factor. Would you agree with that?
Oh,
in terms
totally.
of implementation?
Totally, because to be honest, the investment is not just the money on infrastructure, which Eryn did mention in the beginning of the foundations, but it's about the people. It is totally about educating the people and really transforming the mindset and having people on board with you and your leaders, investing on the people and investing on educating our company as a whole to actually move into that direction was really a big privilege for us.
And to that point, Heidi, what approach did you take, you know, in terms of training? Did you feel that there was training already in place and available within the industry?
When we first started in the last to be very fair, I think the awareness of the 3D space actually really started popping up within the last 2 years. So when we first started in 3-5 years ago, even the technology and the softwares were not as fast as what it is now. And the knowledge was quite limited. So what the Fungs actually really did was they spent a lot of investments on going outside to a lot of academias, a lot of universities, such as like Singularity and universities, where they actually hired a lot of academics to come in and teach us what other industries were doing in their space and what that could also help impact in our industry. And we started coming up with models of how we can actually educate our people ourselves and relate that and make it relevant to what we can do for our industry.
Yeah, and I suppose people who are listening in today are thinking, is it possible to train the people I have? Or is it about going out and recruiting new people? I'm quite interested in that piece.
Yeah. To be honest, you do need new skill sets, but you would also need to train and transform your people. So in my teams and in our organization, I do strongly believe that you need a hybrid. You need a hybrid of both skill sets. You need new skill sets coming in to actually open that technology space and the new ways of working. But you also need to hold on to all of your old domains, the knowledge, and also the skill sets of running the processes. And that knowledge and those skills are not easy to find in such a new world of an industry, right? So it's really putting the art and the science, combining that together.
And it's wonderful to hear you say that, because I think maybe there is still a future for me in this industry, because I'm now, you know, with 20 plus nearly 30 years experience in the industry, feeling quite challenged in terms of my lack of understanding around digitisation. And so it's good to hear you say that. It's very much a blend of the old with the new and taking a new team forward, really.
Yeah, and that's actually what I see a fundamental success of our Center of Excellence, because what we did was we actually transformed a lot of the people who had the skill sets and knowledge into being able to use these tools. To be honest with you, these tools are not easy to adjust to, but there is a very steep learning curve. But having to know the domain knowledge of what this industry means actually is much more beneficial, and being able to understand your customers and help them to actually deep dive into their processes is is very important. So it's nothing about how long you've been in the industry. It's really adapting to new tools and really transforming that mindset to do it differently.
Yeah, it's the whole point about continuous learning, I think, as well. I think
Yeah.
you're demonstrating that point really well today. Can I ask you just one last question before we hand it over to the audience and take some general questions?
Sure.
What, in your opinion, is the key thing in terms of the importance of taking people with you on this digital journey?
It's definitely education. It's definitely communicating and letting the world collaboratively share knowledge. I really strongly do believe in that, and I do think Fung has been taking such a role in participating a lot in a lot of the public forums, in a lot of seminars, to actually let people understand what it really means. Because digitization is a big word, and it has a lot to its meaning. But what does it really mean to us as a person? What does it take for us to make that change? And how do we actually go together into that is very important. So for us, it's all about educating our customers, educating our vendors, educating our own organization to adapt to a new way of working.
I agree, and I don't think I could have ended that session any better. Heather, can I hand back over to you now and maybe take some questions from the floor?
I certainly can. Yes, that's great. Thank you very much, everybody. Eryn, I think this first question is possibly for you. In your opinion, is the industry ready for digital transformation? That's a big question.
That is a very big question. You know, as you introduced me in the beginning and mentioned the year that we started our transformation back in 2013, that was 6 years ago. And I would have, at that point, I would have said it's a 3 to 5 year process. It's a, you know, it can happen like clockwork, and here's the plan. And even with the best laid plans, I would say adoption and implementation has taken longer, mainly back to a theme we've all touched on, which is bringing people with you. And whether that means your team or being able to perpetuate the vision to a bigger audience, I think that does impact how ready organizations are to go forward with a 3D strategy. So is the industry ready? It may not be, but I mean, it may not have the same timeline that I think many of us think it should occur kind of in a holistic way. But I do believe we're going to see a big sea change, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, but in 2 to 3 years. And the reason for that is as quickly as you think you're going to move from a corporate standpoint or your organization standpoint, ultimately the pressure is going to come from the consumer. And that's going to drive the urgency, I believe. So, and I know that the software companies themselves see things happening because of demand, but also because they're setting a course of their own innovation roadmap to push, but it's got to not only be at a pace that companies can adopt and digest and implement, but also it also needs to keep pace with what the consumer is demanding in this very virtual world we're living in. So I think you've got pressure from both sides that's going to necessitate that the industry gets ready faster than even right now they're imagining it's going to happen.
That's great. Thanks a lot for answering that one for us, Eryn. I'll take this over to ID, please, if that's okay. Everyone knows that Fung have a 3-year digital transformation strategy. That's something you've spoken about. But what was the reason behind this? Can you tell us what was the driver behind that?
The driver of the 3-year plan strategy? Or the driver for, okay. So the driver of the 3-year plan strategy is because we see that the world changes very rapidly now. And when we were going through the cycles of strategic planning, we've actually been running our 3-year plans for the last 18 years already. So because we used to actually run 5-year plans, but then because we saw the dynamics of our industry changing very rapidly, our chairman and of course our CEO Spencer and the whole Fung family actually decided to actually run into 3-year plan cycles where we can drastically make very strategic changes to organizations to make us as flexible as possible and adaptive to the market as possible. And that was purely why we went into 3-year plan policies.
Excellent. Thanks for explaining that, Heidi. Really appreciate it. So Jackie, maybe you can help with this one. If colleges and universities are starting to include 3D design into the curriculum, why do you think is there such a big skills gap in the industry?
Yeah, it is true that there's more focus now on 3D design for sure. I don't think the issue lies with the newcomers to the industry, to be honest. I think the biggest skill gap is the people who are already in the industry. You know, and they're very much tied into legacy ways of working. And I even extend that to some of the leaders within the industry, you know, and some of the people who are managing functional areas. For me, that's where the biggest skill gap is at the moment. I think that's the gap that we need to address quite quickly.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think there's quite a few questions come in, I see, on the list where most people are asking, when will the Y3D course be available? I think that's quite key to today. Can you tell us any more about that?
Shall I take that question? I think that's an easy question. It's not as tough as the one that Eryn got earlier on today. The scheduled date for launch is beginning of July, and we're working really hard to that. We're in production at the moment. Eryn's working round the clock to get the course out on time. So yeah, that's the date that we're going to work to. And if the audience have dialed in today want to register on the MOTIF site, we'll give them and we'll provide updates nearer to the time, but it's not that long off. We're looking at 4 weeks away.
Exciting times.
Great. Very much so.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Now I've got a question here that I think Heidi or Eryn might like to take. Can you tell us, was the factory involved during the 3D development process?
Factories have a very big participation in it because they're, at the end of the day, you are manufacturing a product, and some vendors do actually have capabilities of 3D design. Because if you think about, excuse me, if you think about the physical world, the conventional way that we work now, they're the ones who come up with the samples. They're the ones who come up with the protos as well. So the involvement of our vendors is we work together with them and we give them directions of to enhance the efficiencies in getting the samples right. So instead of going through vicious different rounds of prototyping and variations of samples, they now actually relieve a lot of that bottleneck where we would provide them the information through using digital sampling to actually have them make less samples of exactly the same thing but in a different color or in a different trim, less on the strike-offs, and they can actually give us indications of how we are actually technically thinking whether the sample or the product that we are creating is right for manufacturing purposes. Because what we're doing is we're not creating something visual and that's it. We want to actually make it relevant and manufacturable and production ready for them to actually produce the best possible product out to the market.
That's great. Thank you for that, Heidi. Appreciate that. Eryn, is there anything you'd like to add?
I would. I had a very unique opportunity when we first did our 3D implementation at Columbia. And I'll just share that with you because I think it really highlights the role that the manufacturer can play, which turned out to be a little unexpected. But to answer the direct question, yes, we brought the vendors along, a very strategic group of vendors along on the first proof of concept part of the project. And it was definitely strategic in order to see what that end-to-end product to commercialization process could look like. And so we really, and part of it was we didn't know. We didn't know what we didn't know. We kind of anticipated some advantages, a lot of what Heidi just commented on. And those are very tangible. And again, those are what your 3D partners are going to tell you are benefits of adopting 3D. But what we didn't expect was the different approaches that whether we were working with a vendor in India or a vendor in Korea, based on their own infrastructure, having that first experience with the software opened doors for them to actually collaborate with us in ways of product development or iterations or helping us with colorations or trim development and execution and uploading materials and trim libraries into the database. There was this whole range of process improvements and efficiencies we saw by simply including them in the partnership early on. So to me, I think it's a critical thing to include your downstream partners, obviously your upstream partners as well, but I felt that was a real shining example of the collaboration that 3D can bring because you're starting to break down silos.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Eryn. I appreciate you adding your spin on that as well. I do have another question. I know we've run over the time a little bit, so I am going to ask another question though. There's so many coming in, my head's spinning. Is there a critical organisation size to justify or really benefit from making the move from 2D to 3D? Is it for big brands and retailers only? Is the cost prohibitive in terms of investment or for a small organisation?
I've been put in a very interesting situation just in my in the last few years where I transitioned from working for a major outdoor brand to now managing and designing and working with smaller brands, startups, brands where you wouldn't think that 3D could be an asset or or have the same ROI as a big brand, simply because it may not have the same infrastructure or just equity to put into that. But what's fascinating is that sometimes the big companies have the barriers of legacy systems and ingrained processes that are actually more difficult and more expensive to shift. Not only mindset, but actual, you're moving a very big ship and making it turn. Whereas some of the brands I'm working with now, in their startup, in their infancy, can look at 3D as the actual process. In order to not even adopt a legacy type process of the process map that Heidi highlighted, where it's a prototype 1 and it's reviewed and a prototype 2 and it's reviewed. These new startups, these new brands are already more sophisticated in talking to the consumer, crowdsourcing, taking new ideas to market faster, because they're so nimble and they're small, where 3D kind of has a natural affinity to that process. I don't believe that there is any threshold that that you must be size-wise of a company in order to, at some degree, implement 3D strategies and principles into your process flow.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, thank you to everyone who's logged in and joined us today. We've had lots of you on board, so that's brilliant. Massive thank you to Eryn, Jackie and Heidi for sharing their insights and for taking the time out of their day today. Thank you all. And I really look forward to hearing from MOTIF in the future to hear about the information that you can give us and how you can help the industry moving forward. So goodbye to all of our listeners. And again, thank you so much to our speakers for today, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are.